Chapter 5. Luli. The minute Yusuf left, Luli tailed him. A grown man with a curfew, more likely a man with secrets. Even if he was not a hunter, there was something suspicious about Yusuf, and she intended to find out what it was. She did not believe his nebulous backstory, and she refused to let him remain a mystery after she rescued him. "Do not forget, it was I who saved him," Kadir said. Luli suppressed a sigh. Kadir had already explained this to her. While she had been suffocating beneath the jinn's magic, Kadir had pulled Yusuf from his trance and led him to the doors and to the sunlight that had temporarily vanquished the jinn. He'd returned to Luli's shoulder before they exited the place of worship. "You couldn't have helped me yourself?" she asked him earlier at old Ruba's stall. "And reveal myself to another jinn? Never. I could have died, and it would have been your own damn fault for ignoring me." And so here they were, chasing after Yusuf in the hopes of discovering why the jinn had mistaken him for a hunter in the first place. Luli's gold was on family ties. Eventually, the dirt paths of the commoners' quarters gave way to paved cobblestone streets, and the ramshackle houses became small, box-shaped manors with impressive gilded doorways and beautiful latticed windows. The more extravagant homes had multiple floors and fenced-off gardens. One especially lavish dwelling even had 2 balconies. Luli shifted her attention away from the ostentatious buildings and back to Yusuf, who was seamlessly ducking into alleyways between them. Definitely a man of secrets. She had just followed him around the corner of a particularly narrow alley when she saw a man leaning against one of the walls and stopped. The moment he looked up, her heart jumped into her throat. Omar bin Malik, the Sultan's eldest son, regarding her with dazzling smile. When he moved, he seemed to glimmer. Luli saw the silver rings on his fingers and a belt of daggers at his waist. Even his earring, a crescent that curved around his earlobe, seemed to glint menacingly beneath the moonlight. Luli was not taken in by the smile. Though Omar bin Malik had a reputation for being charismatic, he was also, above all else, a hunter. And not just any hunter, but the king of the 40 Thieves, the most prestigious band of jinn killers in the desert. She surveyed him warily, taking in features she'd only ever observed from a distance. Olive skin, almond-colored eyes, hair cut close to his neck, and a stunning smile that somehow did not reach his eyes. She briefly considered feigning naivety, then decided on humility. She fell to her knees. "Hi, Prince!" The prince chuckled. "In the flesh. It is an honor, Saeed." She tried not to tremble as he approached. Here was one of the most feared hunters in the desert, and sitting on her shoulder was a jinn he would kill in a heartbeat just to add to his tally. Kadir thankfully had scrambled down her neck and out of sight. "I suppose it must be." She could make out the dirt on his boots as he stopped in front of her. "Please rise. You will get your robes dirty." She stood with as much pride as she could muster. The high prince was still smiling at her, but his brows were raised just enough to make it into of condescension. He reached into one of his pockets and withdrew a few copper coins. "Here, for your trouble." She blinked. He thought she was a beggar? "Oh no, Sayyidi, I insist." He jiggled the coins in his palm and waited, still with that arrogant smile on his face, for her to take them. Was it better to look right at him or away? The best and worst thing would be to punch him, she thought with irritation. She settled on looking through him and tried not to flinch when their fingers brushed. Afterward, he drew his hand away and said, "Return home. It is getting late, and dangerous things stalk the streets at night." She bristled at what was clearly a command, but forced herself to nod and return away. The prince called after her, "Be wary of shadows. That is where jinn roam." Luli turned, but the high prince was already walking away, hands tucked into his pockets. She did not know how long she stood there, waiting for his shadow to disappear, but it occurred to her afterward that she'd lost Yusuf. She could use the compass to pick up his trail again, but no, there would be time later. "Let's go home," she muttered to the air. "Yes," Kadir said softly. "Let's." Exhaustion settled into Luli's shoulders like a heavy blanket as she made her way back to Dahlia's tavern. Stars had overtaken the night sky by the time they returned. Luli popped a pistachio into her mouth as she tried and failed to focus on the constellations. After the run-in with the jinn, it had been difficult to turn her mind away from the memory of her family's death. Somehow, the shadow jinn had seen the killers in her mind and recognized them. She frowned at the sky. She must have run into them before Kadir killed them. Kadir made a sound in his throat that might have been a cough, but sounded like a wheeze. "Remember to go into the tavern through the back door this time." Luli sighed. Yes, yes. She diverted her attention to the tavern, an unspectacular two-story building with a slanted, dilapidated roof. Lanterns hung from the low scaffolding, illuminating dusty glass windows. Luli could just barely make out the drunken crowds hooting and trilling inside. It was the beginning of the cold season, which meant Dahlia had just received a new shipment of wine, and that was always cause for celebration. Luli had no doubt the revelers were drinking themselves into a stupor. "Do not make the same mistake as last time." Luli flicked his tail, but Kadir continued undeterred. "No one will notice a girl plain as me," you said, and then I had to bite a man. She was glad Kadir was not in his man shape. He would have teased her for the flush in her cheeks. The jinn had already crawled into their bag and retrieved the key they needed when they reached the back door. Luli unlocked it and passed through a storage room packed with wine barrels to the staircase at the back of the building. Inside, the boisterous voices grew louder until she could make out verses of poetry. Though she herself had preferred to deal in coin rather than words, she enjoyed listening to the impromptu poetry contests at the tavern. Tonight, however, she was too exhausted to make an appearance. She would converse with Dahlia tomorrow. She made her way through the upstairs corridor to the apartments, which were in the state she'd left them in. There, in the center of the room, was a low-rising table where she and Kadir tested their relics and ate their meals together, and there was the divan by the window where Luli liked to lounge in the sun. To the right, a series of tome-filled shelves that contained everything from maps to stories to philosophical musings. Her walls were home to a collection of tapestries featuring desert landscapes and an assortment of rugs, most of which had been purchased from the Bedouin tribes selling out of Medine's markets, laid scattered on the floor. It was small, familiar, and comfortable, a good place to rest between ventures. As Luli sat down, the bag of infinite space by the table, her eyes went to the single item on display that belonged to Kadir. It was tucked into a corner, barely noticeable from the door, but there was this shamshir she had purchased for him years ago, mounted on the wall beside the shelves. It was a simple but elegant thing, a steel blade with an ivory grip that had a single red gem in its guard. Kadir rarely wore the blade, preferring a bow when he had to rely on a weapon and couldn't use magic, but Luli had never regretted gifting it to him. It had been the first thing she'd ever purchased for the jinn with her own means. She would always remember his delighted surprise, as well as the uncharacteristically full-mouthed grin that had been on his face when he accepted the blade from her. Those smiles of his were rare, and Luli felt accomplished when she was able to coax them out of him. Never mind that the blade was mostly used as decor now. Kadir treasured it in his own way, and that was enough. Luli closed the door, made her way into the room, and threw herself on the divan by the window. Home, finally, she sighed as she stretched out on the pillows. "We could have been back sooner, but you insisted on chasing a man around the souk." She looked up and saw Kadir looming over her in his human form. As always, he looked unimpressed. "Last I recall, there was a vengeful jinn involved," she said. Kadir frowned. "What you did today was dangerous." "Yes, I know. You've told me 1,001 times. What did I gain by intervening?" "I gained nothing, but a man got to keep his life, though." She sat up and brushed her curls out of her eyes. "I told you earlier that the shadow jinn said something strange." Kadir seated himself on a cushion beside their table. "About the cutthroats in black? It means nothing. Perhaps killers favor the color." Luli glanced out the window. At this time of night, the streets were filled with drunken men, many coming from Dahlia's tavern. She could hear them downstairs, thumping tables and singing loudly, badly. She swallowed. Perhaps she could not shake the feeling that the jinn had been on the cusp of revealing important information. Luli had watched her tribe's murderers die, But no matter how much distance she put between herself and the past, the memories would always be there. "They are dead, Luli." Kadir had been in the middle of organizing their relics. Now he stopped to look at her. "I made sure of it." His confidence eased the tension in her heart, even if she was still wary. She nodded, then joined him at the table to help sort their inventory. Most of the relics in their bag were unspectacular: an hourglass filled with endless sand, a dusty mirror that offered a reflection of the person one loved most, and a string of beads that, when rubbed together, created a gentle sound that lulled one to sleep. But there were other more useful relics too. Luli's personal favorite was an orb cushioned between two luminous wings. It glowed when touched and became steadily brighter when she pressed her palm to it. She and Kadir used it to light their way through the desert. Now she sat sullenly staring at the shadows it cast upon the walls, thinking of everything that had happened today. She considered Prince Omar. If he was so competent a hunter, why had he not captured the shadow jinn before she came to Medine? Why had he not captured any of the jinn supposedly infesting the city? "Princes," Luli grumbled. Kadir raised a brow. "I hear Prince Mazen and Prince Hakim are not so terrible." "How would anyone know? Neither of them ever leaves the palace." Luli folded her arms on the table and set her chin atop them. "Do you think Omar knows the shadow jinn is in Medine?" She couldn't stop thinking of his comment about the shadows. Kadir shrugged. "I hope for her sake he does not." Luli watched as Kadir cleaned the relics in with a rag. She thought about asking him how and why he was able to live in a world where jinn were persecuted for simply existing, but hesitated. She asked many times and received the same cryptic answer. "I am but a single jinn," he would say. "I cannot change your land's prejudices." It was an infuriating answer because it wasn't an answer, but she had long ago learned that Kadir was not like her. While she frequently stuck her nose into others' business, Kadir never involved himself unless it was necessary. It was strange how they could both be so distant from people, yet so have such different ways of coexisting with them. Kadir said. "You are suspiciously quiet." Luli blew a loose curl out of her eyes. "I'm thinking." About you." Kadir frowned. "Now I'm even more concerned." "You should stop that. The worrying, I mean. It's going to give your ageless skin wrinkles." The edges of Kadir's lips curled ever so slightly. "I have aged more in the 9 years I have known you than in the hundreds I've lived before our meeting." Luli grabbed a cushion off the floor and threw it at him. She grumbled when he caught it and set it in his lap. "How old are you anyway?" The half-smile was still on his lips. "Ancient." "It's no wonder you're so cynical. You should take more naps. They might improve your temperament." She gestured to the closed door on her right, behind which lay their sleeping chambers. There were 2 beds inside, though Kadir's was rarely occupied. "What is it you are so fond of telling me? That even exasperating people become tolerable after a good night's rest?" Kadir snorted. "If you truly wanted to make my life easier, you wouldn't leap so carelessly into danger." He set one relic aside and picked up another, the string of sleep-inducing relic beads. "I do not need sleep. You, on the other hand, have been chasing trouble all day. Trouble that I would very much like to get to the root of." When she'd first come to Medine, Luli had paid for her accommodations by delivering messages and tracking rumors for Dahlia. The tavern keeper had taught her knowledge that was power. Blackmail, favors, connections, all of it sprang from a web of constantly shifting rumors. Not understanding the web increased one's risk of becoming ensnared in it. Luli had taken the lesson to heart. It was why she always made it a priority to seek out gossip, and why she still delivered and received messages for Dahlia when she was in Medine. She hadn't become so successful by ignoring suspicious people and occurrences. This thought spiraled in her mind like an eddy until it mellowed into nothingness, until she felt her eyelids drooping. Kadir dimmed the orb with a touch of his hand. "You should get some rest. A tired merchant is easy to fool in the souk." He was running the relic beads through his fingers. "That's why I have you as a bodyguard, fearsome old man." She smiled as she closed her eyes, and when the darkness came, she let it take her.